The design of the taillight is pretty much identical to the 1983 model, and this part right here of the light is pretty much identical to the 1964 model. I'm sure you've seen the new Porsche 911 GT3 by now, and I'm a huge fan. I love the touring model as well. I think it's just a cool idea to kind of tone down the GT3 from the wing and remove the wing and make it more of a, I don't want to call it discreet model, but a more anonymous model than the GT3. What I want to do in this in this video here is to redesign the GT3 Touring, make it into a more traditional 911 design. I'm gonna tell you exactly what I mean by that. So let's have a look here. This is the 1964 Porsche 911 right here, and you have to admire Porsche for their ability to refine a single model over the years from 1964 up until today's 2022 and 2021 and 2022 models. Over the years, some of the design features have changed, and more so in recent years, a specific change happened, and I'm going to show you what that is. So let's have a look at the 64 here, and let me tell you what makes this so special. We have this line here, and I want you to keep this line in the back of your mind when when we go through the years here. So we have this line, shoulder line, just slopes down from the start, going all the way down right here into the taillight. And if you look at the taillight here, just have a look at how low they are actually sitting in compare that graphic to, for example, the wheels here. In relation to the wheels, where do the taillights sit? They sit they sit below the top height of the tire. They sit almost in the middle of the tire right here. Not in the middle, but a little bit further up, maybe 2/3 up of the way of the height of the tire. If you draw a line right here, that's where you find the taillights of the car. And also you have this traditional sloping roofline that is the Porsche 911 that everybody knows the silhouette of. You immediately recognize a Porsche when you see it coming down the road, obviously, because it's been around for so long, and they have refined with each new model. They just changed and refined a little bit, tweaks here and there to make it a better car than it was the previous years. The technology is what they're focused on here, not so much changes in design. They want to keep the traditional package of the 911, not mess with that too much, but update the design, the technology to be in line with the current modern technologies. Can you guess how big of a step this is? How many years are between these two models right here? And I want you to keep that in mind when you look at just how similar these designs are. And that's what I talk about. That's what I mean when I talk about refining a model. I can't think of any other model that's been refined to this point like the 911. If you know a model that I'm maybe missing here, let me know in the comments below. I doubt we can find a model that's been around since the 60s and kept the original proportions of the car and just been refined for this long. So this is a 1984 model. So this is 20 years here, 20 years between these two designs here, and just have a look at how similar these are. It's so interesting to see. So you have the same kind of line here, you have the same shoulder line that dips right there, like this, and you have this beautiful Porsche rear fender here, which you kind of don't have in the first original 64. It's not as pronounced as it becomes in the 1984, and that's the big difference here in the proportions of the car. You have a more pronounced rear fender, but looking at the graphics here, we still have the taillights in this same position as we have in the 1964 model right here, and we still have the traditional Porsche lines right here dipping down like this, which we're used to, of course, for the modern versions as well. So I want to jump forward here in timeline and jump into the 1993 model and 94 as well. So another 10 years between these two. Between these two we have 10 years, and you can see that we still have the taillights in the same position. The design of the taillight is pretty much identical to the 1983 model, and this part right here of the light is pretty much identical to the 1964 model, going from the 1993 all the way back to the 1964 model, and it hasn't changed much. you still have this line right here, still the same shoulder line, still the same dipping lines right here, and still having the graphics right here. The point of this is going to come when I show you the modern version and exactly what happens here. From 1964 all the way to 1994, 95, not a lot has changed. So let's have a look at the 2020 model here and what exactly happened here with the proportions and the graphics. There's a bigger change here between this jump right here, between these two models, is a lot bigger when it comes to the design changes than this jump right here from 1964 to 1994. And what happened here that to me make the 911 look a little bit more generic and lacks its proper 911 identity. And what I want to change in this redesign is that the graphics in the rear, they sit too high now. This could, I mean, if you stretch your imagination, this could potentially be an Aston Martin, because we have the taillights sitting so high up. If we just create some sort of Aston Martin-ish ducktail right here with the lights integrated, you can see that it could possibly be an Aston Martin, because we don't have the traditional 911 situation with the graphics anymore. If we draw a line here and look at where the taillights actually sit in relation to the wheels, you can see that now it's actually above the rear wheels, above the height of the rear wheels. And on top of that, we have this massive rear fender here, or rear muscle, that creates a very rear wheel drive look of the design. And I like that. It looks beautiful. It's a beautiful car, the new 911. However, I think we should go back a little bit and look at the previous 911s all the way up until the late 90s, early 2000s, and kind of implement some of the positioning of the graphics. So what I want to do here, let's have a look at this design right here, GT3 Touring here. We don't have the wing, that's how you can tell that it's a Touring, but it's still this exact same spec and performance as the regular GT3. It's just a little bit toned down. So what I want to do here is have a look at this graphic right here. These lights, or this bar, what I want to do is move it down to this point right here. So we have a lower set of lights. We still have the light bar and everything, but it's gonna sit all the way somewhere around here now. And that creates more in my opinion, a more traditional looking Porsche, because I want to have the taillights sit down there. It makes sense. I think it's a beautiful touch on all Porsches up until today to have the taillights just sit at the bottom of this line here that goes into the bumper, and on top of the bumper we have the light bar that is the traditional Porsche design. So these kind of sit a little too high for me, and I want to experiment with this and see how this is going to turn out. It's a very interesting design. But if we do that, we have to work, we can't just move down this bar here. It's going to mess up the harmony between the different pieces here. What we're gonna have to do is just lower this line as well. So we want to create some more of a reminiscent of the early 1964 shoulder line that dips really hard right here and doesn't come up to this big beefy rear fender. We kind of have to tone that down a little bit and play around with this to make it go into the new graphics that we have down here in the bottom. So that's what we're gonna do right now. One of the big challenges I had when I was redesigning this Porsche 911 GT3 here is if we lower the graphic of the car, we're gonna have a lot of problems with everything else that's above this specific graphic, because the relation or the distance between the light bar and, for example, the air vents on the hood and the wing, for example, and the beefy shoulder, the beefy rear fenders that we have, none of that is going to make sense if we move down the main graphic of the rear, which is the taillights. So we have to redesign not just the taillights, but we have to redesign the entire rear end to suit the new position of the lower taillights. That was the biggest challenge. It's very easy to just copy paste the taillights and move them down and then call it a day, but it's not going to work out for, at least for me. I need to have more. I need to have all the parts of the car and the graphics of the car connect together and create and to make sure that they play along well, both graphically, but also when it comes to the proportions and the distances between these new graphic features that we're creating here. I think I really would love to see Porsche go back to having the lights lower than we have before, and it doesn't have to look so beefy in the rear. It really doesn't. Just look at the 993. It had the lower light bar very low, right above the rear bumper, and it still had a very beefy, planted looking rear end. It's one of the best looking rear ends of all time, and it still has managed to create the original position of the taillights of the 911 while maintaining a planted, beefy rear-wheel drive look of the design, and that's kind of what I want to go with here. It is a bit of a challenge to remold the entire rear fender to fit the new design that we're making here, but I think it's a necessity. Otherwise the fender would look like it's sitting way too high and doesn't have a connection to the end point of the light bar that we're creating right here. So it needs to connect to the kind of corner parts of the end of the taillight. I want the main creases or the main curvatures of the rear fender to be connected to the corners of the end of the taillight, if that makes sense. And on top of that, we need to redesign the air vents as well. In the rear here, I want to make them a little bigger, stretch them further down so we don't have a massive panel just above the taillights where nothing goes on. I want to not have it stretch out too far, the metal of the car, before we reach the air outlets of the engine bay here. So I want to stretch that down and also work on the pattern there to make it look like it's properly done and not just have it be all wobbly and stuff. That's one of the last changes I'm gonna make to this redesign here. On top of that, I prefer to have the tailpipes be just a simple design where you have two tailpipes in each side of the car underneath each main graphic of the taillights. Just have them be on each corner and a simple diffuser. Just simplify the graphics in the rear a little bit here and not have it be too complicated, because in my opinion Porsche 911 is one of these cars that I really don't want to become just another sports car design. I want them to retain their DNA of what a 911 is without compromising their design. So I don't want them to slowly turn into a generic looking sports car, because that's not what 911 is. It hasn't been since the 60s, and I hope they don't go to that I don't hope that's where they're headed with their design, that they change the rear end too much and just slowly turning it into an Aston Martin looking car, because a Porsche 911 is a Porsche 911. It has a very specific design, and more so a very specific side view. So if we look at the modern 911s and compare it to all the way up to the late 90s and 2000s, we see that slowly the rear end is starting to creep up further and further up. I know that has a lot to do with the regulations, but that's also the reason why the GT3 here has a brake light, for example, all the way up on the air vents on the rear to comply with whatever regulations is necessary to have a certain height for the rear brake light. But that's kind of what I wanted to share with you today, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. I'm really happy that I went the extra step here and blacked out the part that's around the taillight. I think that made a big difference to the design, and also blacked out the chrome trim around the window, because I'm not a huge fan of chrome. Not on a GT3, maybe the regular Carrera can have some chrome here and there. But if you go with a sporty model of the GT3, I don't want any chrome anywhere on the car, maybe the exhaust tips. But hey, it's an option. You can get them in black if you want to for the GT3. So that's it for this redesign. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I think this could actually work for the 911. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.